The mission of the South African Human Rights Commission as an independent national human rights institution has to support institutional democracy through promoting, protecting and monitoring the attainment of everyone's human rights in South Africa without fear or prejudice. I am Thabo Molokwane. Welcome to this edition of Soweto Today. Tonight we observe Human Rights Day, which is commemorated annually on the 21st of March, to remind South Africans about the sacrifices that accompanied the struggle for the attainment of democracy in the country. Joining us in studio to talk more about this is Zamantungwa Mbeki, who is the Human Rights Commission Gauteng Provincial Manager. Mr. Mbeki, thanks very much for taking the time. Welcome to Soweto today.
Thank you for having me.
I want us to talk about the Human Rights Day. You know, what comes to mind is the incidents that took place back in 1960s, you know, the marches, all those events that happened when women were marching for the rights of South Africans, and all the struggle that happened throughout the years. Perhaps we can start by going through what really happened to us, you know, as a country to commemorate Human Rights Day.
So Human Rights Day is concerned with what happened in Sharpeville, what is basically known as the Sharpeville Massacre. And what was going on at that time, as you've rightly said, was that in the 1960s, there was what was called the pass laws. And this was what had happened at that time. And in different locations across the country, there was mass protests against the pass laws. There was laws that said that people had to carry documents identifying them, particularly identifying them based on their race. And they had to carry these documents in order to gain access to certain areas in South Africa, but also to retain them in particular areas in South Africa. So what had happened on that day is that there was most protests across the country, but more particularly in Sharpeville, we had the incident where people were shot and killed by the police there. So on this day, we remember those people and the sacrifice that they made for their lives there, and some who are even still alive today.
You know, there's always a debate about the significance of the day. Some people would say that it doesn't mean anything to us anymore and stuff. What do you think it means to South Africans in general?
It can't be that it can't mean anything. For me and you to sit the way that we're sitting today, having this conversation as two black individuals in a predominantly white area, that is what it means. It means that we can move freely in this country. We can, there are no spaces that we cannot enter because of our color or because of where we were born and who we were born to. So even though there are challenges in the country currently, we cannot say that people who sacrificed their lives, some died, some we don't even know where they are, where they were buried, and we cannot say that that sacrifice was futile. Some will say, and we cannot ignore those, what those people did for you and I sitting here and for the listeners sitting at home.
You know, looking at the current situations, as you've mentioned, in the country, do you think we've made strides, or there's still a long way to go for South Africa, you know, to say that these rights, that right, these rights, you know, they are there and then they're being observed? Because we're seeing a lot of, you know, human rights that have been infringed. You look at different incidents that are happening, that have happened also in recent months. Do you think we've made strides as a country in terms of moving forward, or there's still more that needs to be done?
It's a yes and yes. There's great strides that have been made. Looking at different sectors, for instance, we can now criminally prosecute. We can use the Equality Act to challenge people who make racial or sexist slurs. So those are things that we must take as victories, that we can do something about that, whereas previously you would not be able to do anything if anybody called you any particular racial slur. There's definitely more that still has to be done, whether we're talking about access to socioeconomic rights. By there I mean rights to housing, right to water. We've got a mass crisis relating to electricity. There's definitely more that can be done. But it doesn't mean that we must ignore the rights and the privileges that we also have and the responsibilities that come with having those rights. Those we must always remember.
You know, they're mostly the basic ones that people seem to not understand. You know, you look at a lot of situations whereby people would be afraid to express themselves somehow because they feel that it's either they're going to be victimized or something. But in terms of the workspace, you know, working environments, we're seeing, you know, a lot of companies, or maybe I must say different industries, not walking in the same direction as how, you know, human rights groups such as yourselves would want us to go.
No, definitely. There's a lot that this falls part of what I was saying, that there's still a lot to be done. In the workplace, you still have a lot of discrimination that can happen in the workplace. You can still have different challenges in the workplace, sexual harassment, for instance, in the workplace, different inequalities happening in the workplace. And so definitely there's a lot that still needs to be done in the labor space. But there's strides. Like, for instance, I want to make reference to, there was a constitutional court case that came out, I think last year, if not the year before, that talks about the rights of domestic workers, and now that domestic workers can claim under COIDA. Those are things and those are victories that we're supposed to be celebrating. I mean, if you look at a domestic worker works in a very personal space. In somebody's home. And so that's why I'm saying that rights come with responsibilities, because when you're an employer, even if you're black, white, you then have that responsibility to register, to make sure that the person working in your home is registered, so that they can claim those benefits. And this came from a case where a lady was working outside and fell and drowned into the swimming pool. And there's no provision for her before in law, but now there is. So there are strides. There are things that are happening to protect the rights of people in different spaces. And that's why these platforms are very important, so that we can inform people that there are these protections. There is some good that is happening. You know, the bad sometimes outweighs the good.
After the break, I want us to, you know, touch on some of the incidents that happened in the past, particularly the recent one whereby we saw that young person who was strangled in one of the swimming pools, which was dubbed Whites Only.
Okay.
Maybe if you can touch on that just a bit later on. Much of South Africa's challenges to human rights and inequality are still reflected in racial, class and gender fault lines. These present overwhelming human suffering to marginalized groups such as the poor, women, children and youth and disabled people. High unemployment also remains a serious challenge. Now, after the ad break, we will unpack more of this. Stay with us.